It's just gone 5 past on my phone, so I think let's kick off. Letting Zonny in. Welcome everyone to the final straight. It's I think we certainly the team. I know Sean certainly feels like one of those Berg horses that as you turn around, they smell the stables, and he's ready to go. I can tell you, every night he sent me an email well after midnight. So I know he's had quite the week. Look, this is the third and the final piece of the morality and reality of restructuring your organization in post-COVID South Africa. This is really the session where the tire hits the tar, and we get to unpack what the future looks like, and also how data analytics can help navigate through our new normal. So I hope you all enjoy. Happy and peaceful Friday, everyone. We're there through another week. We're at level 1. So let's all hope that this is good news for the economy, and that we can get back to some sense of normality and really start looking at how we can unpack and use analytics in a moral way to really do the right thing by employees, but also restructure and position ourselves to capitalize on the medium and long term. So what I would, we're pretty much family now, so I don't think there's too much introduction needed. You've spoken, I've been your host for all the sessions. Sean's been involved in all of them as the head of the company, and you've heard Bongani's baritone on the last session, and he's also going to be talking through some of the polls, etc. today. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sean to kick off the last and then the final in the series. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Craig. Right, we all know where we are today. We're got through where we came from. We've got through where we are, which we handled on Wednesday. What I'd like to finish off today with is, how do we get to where we need to be? Because a lot of us are going to be charting new roads in the next few months, which we'll see in a little while with our poll results that we ran on Wednesday. So moving straight into the business of the day. Next slide, Craig. We'll very quickly start. I'll hand over to my colleague Bo to take us through the results of the online survey we conducted on Wednesday. And the results are quite interesting. We did fix the feedback received in terms of that little glitch we had in the morning session. So we'll first of all have a look at the results of that online survey in terms of what are companies looking at. And it's not the largest sample size, but it is still quite indicative. I'll take you through data analytics and our new reality, and really why we're doing what we're doing and what we're doing with 21st century analytics. There is a very short story behind it that I'd like to share with you. And then the part I really enjoy going through is a couple of case studies called 4 Wrong Choices, which shows you what could happen if you make choices in the information vacuum, which we very often use when we embark on restructuring and reorganizing our companies, and the impacts that our decisions have on the staff that work for us. And that will really where we'll be finished with a conclusion and some points to give you about benchmarking. And that will conclude our journey this week. So moving on, I will hand over to my colleague Bo to take you through the results of the survey on Wednesday.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thanks to Craig as well for hosting us. It's quite an interesting thing if you looked at the power of data. I've just been observing the data, the COVID data statistics in the past couple of months, and level 1 couldn't have come at a better time for us to have this triangular session that we're completing today. Africa has proven, if you looked at the global statistics, has proven to be slightly more resilient than what people gave it credit for at the beginning of this Black Swan event. So we basically are quite a resilient bunch of people, but not only that, it means we have geared and prepared this continent for the future in terms of its survival. The results, as Sean has indicated, are quite interesting. Put sample size aside, it is more important for us to have a look at the trends. And these results augur very well with the theme of this launch, morality versus reality, or morality and reality. Looking at the results for survey question number 1, are you considering changes to your business or your operating model in the next 6 months? Quite interestingly, that we're seeing just over 70% of the respondents indicating that yes, they are considering changes to their operating model. And I would like for us to look at that result in tandem with question 3, where the question is, are you considering a restructuring exercise in the next 6 months? Right there, another interesting finding which mirrors the result of question 1. Just over 70% of the respondents also indicating that there will be a restructuring, or they are considering restructuring. So this basically tells us that a lot of organizations and the market sees the impact of the Black Swan event, COVID-19, and sees the necessity of applying proper techniques of responding to your pastel environment by adjusting your operating model. But let's have a look at the right side of this picture. And as we put a sharp focus on the social contract that organizations have with the societies within which they operate. Question number 2, are you considering reducing staff numbers in the next 6 months? And here, an interesting observation is just under 60% is saying no, not considering reducing numbers, but still a significant, just over 40% saying yes to that possibility. And if you look at that picture and juxtapose it to the responses to question 4, which talks to which levels the people are considering reducing, and a significant majority, just about 70%, indicated that the impact will be across all levels. And again here, the picture that solidifies the morality aspect of this presentation is a lot of our respondents are realizing the social contract that employers have with their societies, clearly understanding that you can actually still make changes to an organization without the knee-jerk reaction of immediately considering reduction in costs, reduction in headcount as the first solution to organizational resilience. So these are quite interesting and very much support, I think, the theme and the analysis that we've made from chapter 1 to what Sean is going to be speaking to on chapter 3 today. I'm going to pause here for a moment, Sean, and then hand over back to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bo. Yes, very, very interesting. And, you know, in our, what can I say, outside of a survey, in terms of feedback we've had from our clients, we've had pretty much the same picture that has supported what is going to have to happen. But we're going to have to do it a bit differently than what has happened in the past. It's not just an isolated headline which comes through the business press anymore, which says X company planning to retrench 2,000 people. These days, we do read that headline in a different way than we did perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, where we sort of thought, oh, that's bad. These days, we do understand what that headline means for the country, and that each of those jobs that's lost has an impact on further jobs downstream and further jobs that are connected to the job holder in terms of family ties and its structure that supports that job holder supports. So I think it's good that companies are starting to realize that they need to do things slightly differently. And we wanted to add our own little piece today to how do companies do that. So thanks again, Bo. Moving on into our bulk of our presentation today. Just to pause here and say that, you know, for a long time, we've heard all these wonderful phrases, 4IR, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things. I was talking to colleagues the other day and recounting to them how about 2 years ago, I was chatting to the CEO of one of our mining clients, and he was talking, you know, he threw the words AI into every sentence, very excited about it as a new form of technology, very excited about the possibilities it presented. And I kept asking him, well, what projects are you envisaging? What exactly are you going to do in a concrete way to bring it in? And he stopped suddenly and he said, I haven't actually thought that far. It just sounded so good that it could do good things for my company. And I think that's the problem is, you know, we throw these terms around these days, and we throw them around in abundance, and we get bombarded with them every day and told how good they are. But if we take it, you know, if we divorce ourselves for a second from our tablets and our smartphones, where we see most of this applying, how exactly do we use these new terms that are flying around now, and this technological development which is happening and which has been speeded up by the advent of COVID? And that really has been a question that's been plaguing myself and quite a few of my colleagues for a long while now, in that the other term that we use a lot of is data mining. And we speak about our data, and we speak about how much data firms have and how much data there is out there. Another story we've seen in the last few weeks was that huge data loss by that company Experian, I think it was, that works in the credit space. And I mean, part of the reason why that data was stolen from them was the person who stole it wanted to sell it on to financial services companies as a client database to contact. So we can see these days that, you know, data is real. It's a commodity, much like buildings and much like vehicles and much like infrastructure. Data is a commodity. But by the same token, we have so much data that sometimes we don't know what to do with it. And the other problem is that data mining, coming to my second point, is complex. You know, they don't call it data mining for nothing. It's a little bit like resource mining. If you don't mine in the right place and you don't do the right things, it's going to be a very expensive waste of time. So there's a lot of data, that information that can guide us in how we operate, staff, train, and resource our companies. And that data very often slips us by. But even if we harvest that data, and I've seen a lot of clients over the years get a lot better at harvesting that data, even if we harvest that data properly, the problem is that when we have our own data is useless in isolation, must be compared to something. I wrote an article the other day which I used the analogy of these smartwatches, which a lot of us wear these days, which very kindly tells me what my heart rate is. And I was saying, you know, if my heart rate is 85, and I go, well, my heart rate is 85, I have no idea what that means. I'm not a medical person. I'm not a nutritional expert. What does 85 mean? Is it good, bad, indifferent? Can I celebrate? Should I be hitting the road more? When I get something that says in my age bracket, a good heart rate is 75, then I know that I'm unfit. My 85 is not good in comparison to my age bracket's heart rate. And then I know what I need to do and what position that benchmark places me in. So same with data. If we have data in isolation, we need to compare it to something. And that's exactly why such a big part of our business is salary surveys and remuneration surveys. You as a client need to know what you're paying your staff and where you're paying your staff. And you need to know what the market is paying your staff. But it's very difficult to go to your competitor and say, we want to know what we're paying our engineers. What are you paying yours so we can pay them the same? Because your competitor is not exactly going to tell you. So hence the start of things like salary surveys, where everybody or a lot of companies take part and can do so in an anonymous way. But that's for surveys, salary surveys. If we talking about questions, coming to my point 4, are our divisions and departments understaffed or overstaffed? Are our team sizes too big? Are our team sizes too small? Do we need additional supervisory and management positions? If we do that, we've made the wrong choice. It comes at an added cost. What about our corporate support staff? Do we have too many? Do we have too few? Because if we have too few, our operational staff aren't geared to operate properly. But if we have too many support staff, often they are a burden on cost. Where do we get the information to make these right decisions? So this journey started many, many years ago, and started with saying, we have this wealth of information that comes in terms of companies, and as 21st century, we have this wealth of information that we collect for salary surveys in any case. And within that information sits a lot of the answers to the structural and staffing issues that I've just alluded to, and quite a few others as well. If you just look at the data differently, extract it differently, and have a good knowledge of the industry in order to be able to translate it properly and see what the information tells you. As a company, coming to my second last point, we can do internal benchmarking, and I've seen companies do this very successfully, where once again, if you've got 5 factories, take your factory that's performing best and use that as the best in class internal benchmark, and then try and lift the performance of your 4 other factories to the level of that best in class factory. But very often you're only benchmarking against yourself. And one of my clients who did this came to us afterwards and said, I'm terrified of going through this internal benchmarking, because what if my best performing factory performs as one of the worst performing factories against one of my competitors? It's not really, I'm not really improving where we are. So looking at this situation and looking at the scenario of data being needed, and what we could do with it, and what we could extract, and what we could provide in terms of support, to going back to the theme that we've covered this week, allowing companies to make the right decisions and to make sure that their decisions don't impact beyond what they need to impact on. We wanted to change this. So moving on to the next slide, is really where 21st century analytics came from. It's a very robust database that is built on all the information that we've collected over the years, over the last 20 years. We've got data from over 1,700 countries. We've got companies. We've got over 80,000 benchmark positions. We've got a very good industry spread. We have a very good spread across public and private sector, and I think that is a very important point to make, because very often, as we know, we've seen it enough in the news, public sector and SOE companies work somewhat differently from a lot of private sector companies, where there is complications like being listed company, being driven solely by profit. And very often the mandate of a public company and a state-owned entity is not purely based on profit. It's there to provide service and should be there to provide something to the community. And very often that will have an impact and an effect on how it's staffed and how it is structured. So we have a put together 21st century analytics, and we hope it will be able to help the market in making some of these decisions going forward. So what I will do then is move straight into, it's very nice to say to people we've got something new, but how does it work and what does it do? So what we've done to make this a bit clearer is gone through 4 client issues, which are real issues we've worked with, and really what happens in this instance. The first client issue that we'll deal with is one I'll call which department. So the client is in the manufacturing industry and their order book has dropped. This was a little while before COVID, and they were in dire straits. They wanted to cut down on staff numbers because, as we know, that's where you look first. It's your largest single cost item. But in this case, unlike a lot of companies where I think for a very long time there's a lot of fat that's been carried on staff structures and within structures, and especially those of you that have worked for large corporates who have very large corporate headquarters, you will know that a corporate headquarters has quite a few staff that they could perhaps do without. But this particular client was unsure where they could cut because they already were operating with a very lean structure. They feel that their engineering department is overstaffed. Now, once again, the emphasis is on the word feel. And one can then interrogate that further and say, but where does that word feel comes from? And it's really saying, well, we don't really have much to go on. But what we did was someone came up with the idea of looking at the other internal departments within our factories. And we looked at the staffing costs of planning. We looked at the staffing costs of production. We looked at the staffing costs of safety, health, and environment. And we looked at the staffing costs of logistics. And when we put those together, engineering seemed to be expensive. Now, one of the reasons we know that could be a reason for that is that we have suffered from a shortage of certain engineering skills in this country for a very long time. And I know from having done extensive work in the mining, industrial, and FMCG industries that there are certain class and experience level of engineers that are in demand because we don't produce enough engineers as a country to satisfy what we should. So the client took a decide to implement a 20% cut in the engineering department staffing. Once again, this decision is taken, and on a wing and a prayer almost, using a form of internal benchmark and saying, well, I hope we're right. Now, if we'd been able to draw against our benchmark and our industry benchmarks, and moving on to the next slide, we had then come back and we have the value of true information. Just to explain, using a benchmark of companies in the same industry and in a similar size bracket, because it's no good comparing a very large company with 7 factories to one small company with 1 factory. You have to compare apples with apples. But if we look at the top is the client. That is the percentage of their staff across their job families. And in this instance, you can translate job families as divisions as well, because the most of the people within the job family will be within a specific division. You can then look at the bottom, and the bottom will be the industry and what percentage generally people are, what percentage job families are in a specific job family or division. And if you then compare yourself as the client having 2.91, let's call it 3% for the sake of brevity, 3% of your staff in engineering, you can see that on average in industry, the figure is 8.62, nearly 9%, which means that your engineering component is actually understaffed against market norms by almost 30%. And now you're going to cut it by a further couple of percentage points. So you're going to cut a function within the business that is already understaffed when compared to industry benchmarks even further. By contrast, if you look at your operations component, the operations component is very large. It's almost 3 times that of industry. So information is possibly telling you that you could be cutting in the wrong place. Now, I just have to stop here for 2 minutes and issue a bit of a disclaimer. And that is that one doesn't look at industry benchmarks, especially not in an organizational design and structural context. One doesn't look at benchmarks and take those benchmarks as gospel. There could be reasons why your operations component is nearly 3 times that of industry. It could be that a lot of the benchmark companies within industry operate in highly automated environments, hence the lower number of staff, especially when you compare it to the supply chain percentage. Whereas you are operating older factories that are more manual. Hence the need for higher staffing levels. there could also be certain variables that come in on the engineering side. So I just want to emphasize and make the point that, looking at benchmarks like this is never as easy as saying, right, industry has 9%, we have 3%, we need to expand our engineering department very quickly. What it does tell us is that we need to be very careful if we are going to cut a department that's already low by industry standards even further, and that we haven't even looked, after what we've done, we haven't even looked at the fact that some of our other divisions might be overstaffed against industry, and go and investigate the reasons for that. So the point of this information is not to provide a quick and easy, or as some people like to say, quick and dirty, to making the easy decisions or the right decisions. But it does provide you with clarity in terms of where you sit against your peers in industry. And that picture will hopefully prove the value of information, as the title of the slide goes. And to the last point in the text on the slide, this information may lead to a better decision being made. So that is really the value of this information, is to place where you think you are and what you think your staffing levels are in context, and then hopefully be able to make a correct decision, or a better decision than an imperfect internal benchmarking exercise that is not comparing apples with apples might have done. Moving on to the second client issue, which levels. Client in the financial services industry, and they feel they are top-heavy management-wise, which we are hearing from more and more clients. In the past, it was always fairly knee-jerk, and I've worked in over 40 countries globally, so I know this isn't exceptional to South Africa. I've seen it in most of the countries I've led projects in. That a couple of years ago, it was the knee-jerk reaction to get rid of your lower-level staff when you did need to make cuts. And what we've seen over the last few years is that has changed as companies have become more aware of the fact that, getting rid of 4 senior management positions is the equivalent of getting rid of perhaps 500 or 300 lower-level staffing positions, and that perhaps they do not need all the staff that they have at a management level. So we have seen that coming more and more to the fore, and I would say this, I've seen this been happening globally. So the client wants to reconfigure their staff complement, and they feel they need less management staff. At those of you that speak the language of the Patterson job grading system, they need less management staff at a Patterson D level. Your real mid to senior management level. So they initiate a Section 189 process in which they are targeting 8 managerial staff upon that Patterson D level. Now, if we had been able to withdraw information for them from our database and provided them with one of the battery of tests that we have in analytics, moving on to the next slide, we can see that the client is the actual bars. I don't know which color it is, and I'm probably going to put my head on an interior decorating block here and say it looks turquoise to me. I hope it's what it looks like to you. That is the client information. The olive green line you see is the industry. It's the industry standard. So running your eye along that line, you can see, if we go to where I've placed the red arrows, if you look at their current D levels, you can see that their current D levels are actually already significantly lower than industry standards. And that means that they already have a very lean management structure. And, one of the things is we like to cut costs on management structures and take what we call the fat out, cut the fat out. But we also know that by removing too much of your management and by removing too many management levels, very often these management levels is where the execution of strategy gets driven. It's where the operalization of the strategy, where the actual figures, where the tire hits the tar, this is where it happens. So if you decimate that too much, you could do damage to delivery of the outputs that your company requires. So if you look at that at those D levels, you will see that that's not actually, if you compare it to industry, where your problem areas lie. If you move to the left of the graph, you will actually see, if you look at your B3, B upper and C2 levels, especially your B upper and C2, you will see that you're actually suffering from quite high levels there compared to what the general levels are in industry. And that could point towards a number of issues. There's too many administrative level staff. The career ladders are wrong, and you can actually see from this graph that something is wrong with the career ladders, because you can see the amount of staff at the C1, which means there's a bottleneck there in career terms of staff moving from a B upper to a C2, which is quite a big move. So you've got very high grade levels at a lower level. You've got very high percentages of staff at lower grade levels. And that then opens the conversation to say, what is the reason for that? Is there a good reason for it? Once again, are we dealing with older systems? Are our processes configured differently where we need that amount of staff at those levels? Or is it the fact that we've actually never cast our eye there and never examined why we have such high ratios of staff compared to industry, and what industry might be doing that we're not, or what we could be doing better and with less, and that we've actually perhaps made a bad decision in getting rid of managerial positions when we should actually be cutting the fat a little further down the line. If we move to the next slide, there's a different way of looking at it as well. And that's what we call a company shape. You get a number of company shapes. On the left, you would see industry. And that company shape is pretty much what we call a diamond shape, where you've got fewer people at the top, a lot of people in the middle, the big part of the diamond, and then going down again to the bottom. Now, when company shape theory started about 30 years ago, it was always held out that the best company shape was actually the one on the right, or similar to the one on the right, which would be a triangle. More people at the lower levels of the company, and then as you move up, you need fewer and fewer and fewer people till you have quite few people at the top compared to the levels at the bottom. But we're seeing less and less triangle shaped companies these days. What we're seeing a lot of is what you can see is the snapshot of this particular financial services industry right now, and that is the diamond shape. And that's really where people are hitting a point roundabout in this industry at around about your C3, C upper D1 levels, where they're really starting to hit their career, the career ceilings, almost the glass ceiling that we always hear people talk about. And there you can see that they're not getting through that, and that's where a large staff component is now congregating, because that is as far as they will go from a career development point of view. If you look at the client on the right, you can immediately see, if you look at C1, that there is a career bottleneck. There's some issue there. There's a grading issue, or there is a leveling issue, or there is a talent pathing issue, a career and succession issue. But there is some issue that is present there between the BU and the C2 grades on the client graph on the right. And so by looking at this graph, you can also, once again, by just casting your eye from industry to client, also see that the D levels are not actually where the issue sits, but more at certain of the lower level administrative support levels that this company should rather be eyeing. So hopefully, once again, to stress the point I made with the first case, this is not telling you you've got to mold your levels to match that of industry. You know, each company is an individual company in its own right, but that hopefully the information supplied will now put you in a position to make a better decision. Moving on to the third client issue. In this one, we feel we don't have enough support. There's a client in the transport industry, and those of you who are faced with these kind of situations will, I'm sure, know about these kind of things. Continued requests by line managers. to recruit additional support staff, such as HR, IT, secretarial, and finance. We don't have enough help. We're not getting help from HR. They're not delivering a service to us. They obviously need more people. We're not getting our figures on time. The debtors aren't going through, creditors aren't going through, finance obviously are understaffed. Huge problems with our admin, secretarial, and admin services. I'm sharing one admin personnel with 4 other managers. I need my own one. And so these requests come through. I'm sure a lot of you can sympathize. We need more, we need more, we need more. Finally, as happens, and those of you that have children will know, if they address an issue long and hard enough and make their voices loud enough, we often cave in, as the taxi industry showed us earlier in COVID. So finally, the client approved new budgets for these divisions and gave an extra 30% of staff costs, which then allowed for a number of new hires. And following that, they initiate a recruitment process for more support staff. Now, once again, moving on to the next slide, if we could have drawn some information for them on a benchmark basis, using, again, a benchmark of companies in the same industry and in a similar size bracket, when we compare their support staff, and they're in the dark gray on the left, and the industries, the blue on the right, what you would do is, clients will tell you who they consider operational and who they consider support, because this isn't the same across industries. If you are in KPMG or PwC, an accounting firm, a financial services firm, accountants are operational. In the mining industry, accountants are support. So it all depends on the industry and the client's particular needs. But by and large, we would look at clients, we would look at staff that are front-end facing, client facing, looking at what is being done and generating, being part of the cash generating part of the business. We would really look at them as operational, and we would have your traditional view of your HR, finance, IT, legal, corporate communications, etc., as your typical support staff. So coming back to this, if we look at this, we can see that their support staff is actually already on a high ratio compared to industry. Their support staff sits at 51%, versus next door you can see industry support staff average is 33%. And if you actually then look at the operations staff, we can see that their support staff actually outnumber their operational staff by 51% to 49%. And that's 20% over the industry average. So we now can see that on an average in industry, we're looking at a ratio of about 67-33, or 70-30. Here we've got a company where support staff actually make up the bulk of the staff. And, to put another spin on it, you could almost say the tail is wagging the dog. So they've just increased budget for an area of staff where they already are higher versus operational decisions. That's not to say that these poor managers who've put in request after request after request and made all these issues about receiving support, and the support staff aren't living up to service level agreements they have with operations, etc. They're not wrong, but the reason that they're not doing this is that they are undercapacitated in some areas and overcapacitated in others. They have bad processes or poor processes. They haven't been trained properly, or they're just suffering from lack of skills in certain areas. But having this picture now allows the company to start digging and find what the actual problem is, and not make a knee-jerk reaction that increases staff costs, number one, but even worse, number two, increases staff costs on the non-cash generating side of the business, being on the support staff side, which, as can be seen here, is already high compared to compared to operational staff. I'll just stop here for a second because I think there's a question or two, Craig, that has come through.
Correct. Chris asked a question, Sean. use
I'll just
do you want to
have a look at it. Yes. Why do companies not use data analytics? Yes, I think there is a lack of info locally. As I said, I've worked. I used to work for an international consulting company, Hay Group, which then became Korn Ferry. So, being exposed to quite a few of there are not a lot of benchmarking systems that provide this data globally. That's the first point. The second point is very often when you do find companies, and there is an example, one is called Dynaplan, and it operates out of Europe. They are prohibitively expensive in local company terms. I think Dynaplan's cheapest analysis starts at 5,000 euros for one simple test, which, as you can imagine, for South African companies is just not feasible. So yes, I think that is the reason, is that there is not much in the market, which is exactly what drove us to start working with us, to be able to provide the external benchmark that can make your decision making easier. In terms of local data versus international data, yes, 67-33. Remember, we're talking about something like the transport industry, where they generally do keep very low ratios of support staff. No doubt, if we had to repeat this in another industry like the financial services industry and have a look at support versus operations, the ratios would probably drop on the operations side and rise on the support staff side. We generally do, in the South African context, in my experience, see slightly higher ratios of support staff than we would in, let's say, developed economies like the US or Europe. And part of the reason for that is why we see higher ratios in developing economies is that very often companies are working with slightly older processes, slightly more complicated processes, or they haven't got as lean and mean as some compatriots in the developed markets have. Right, moving on to the last case study so that we finish in time. Client issue 4, big teams. Client is in the mining industry and they are under pressure from their board. I don't know why my screen has, there we go. Client is in the mining industry. They've been under pressure from their board, and we all know what it's like being under pressure from your board, to reduce managerial costs or levels. And there's a very interesting story about how this came about. One of the non-executive directors sits on another mining company's board, and they feel that that company has fewer managerial levels, and they've come back to the other board they sit on and said that we think you could take out in terms of your supervisory level costs. They're way too high and they should drop. This, of course, is based on anecdote and not really based on hard data. But the company does embark on a project to reduce supervisory staff levels. And in order to achieve that, what they need to do is combine their teams under a smaller number of supervisors. Now, this has important impacts, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but they decide to reduce their supervisory staff by 20%. So what if we could have produced some hard data for them? Moving on to the next slide. If we look at something in the organizational design consulting we call SOC, which is span of control, there have been many studies over the years, and there have been many benchmark human organizations used. Just for interest's sake, two of the most popular human systems used to benchmark team sizes in corporate, strangely enough, has been the military on the one hand and sports teams on the other, because both are in very similar yet differing competitive situations where you need an effective number of people to work together. So a lot of corporate span of control studies have relied on military and sports as input into what constitutes an optimal team size at different levels of an organization. And we have a wealth of information now of research studies that have come out over the years. We know, for instance, very briefly, that an executive team under an MD or a CEO, the optimal size for that is 6 to 8. which is smaller than if you had a team of artisans reporting to you across different disciplines. In that case, the optimal team size would be around about 15. So at different levels in an organization, we know that there are different optimal team sizes. The knock-on effect is if teams are too big, they become unwieldy and stuff starts dropping off the table. But if teams are too small, it means we have inflated management or supervisory costs. Because if we have 20 staff and we decide on a ratio of 1 supervisor to 5 staff, we need 4 supervisors for 20 people. If we instead think we can get away with 1 supervisor per 10 staff, it means we only need 2 supervisors for 20 people. So if we pull information from the industry, from the mining industry, and we look at the typical foreman and the employee to managers ratio, the industry being at the top, we'll see that the smallest teams in industry are around about 1 supervisor per 15 employees. The mid-range is around about 1 to 20, and on the high side, the larger teams are around 1 to 28. Now, in the client's instance, their smallest team is the size already of industry's largest team. And their mid-size is already 10 staff members higher than the average team size in industry, moving right up to 1 to 34 at the top end of the scale. So their teams are already large. And if they're actually going to almost double the size of that team, it's fairly clear, and if you had to add another test into this, which is the span of control benchmarking studies, which we do have, which are being conducted both locally and internationally, we would know that once you start breaching, at 1 to 30, you're already breaching optimal size by a good 5 people. If you're going to increase that 30 even further, you're going to move into negative territory in terms of team effectiveness. So this decision, once again, the information that we got out of here might have helped to make a better decision. Right. I hope that that was interesting for you. Just to finish off with 4 quick points, 4 simple rules when using your workforce data, and this doesn't matter whether you're benchmarking internally, externally, or whatever the case may be. 4 things I've learned over the years that are very important to remember. Please, number 1, make sure you're comparing apples with apples. And I've used this here. It's no use if you have an open pit mine, you compare an open pit mine with an underground mine, or you compare an automated factory with a non-automated factory. You're just not comparing apples with apples. And the figures that come out of a flawed study like that are not going to be accepted or trusted. Just make sure that you consult with the areas in your company you wish to benchmark with. They really are the best source of information. And there's a host of variables that they might be aware of that you might miss that you will get. I know point number 3, you might say, why would you even write that? But you will not understand with the huge amount of computing power most companies have these days. Please make sure that you extract up-to-date and accurate data, and that it's not last month's or last year's or just before the cutoff date or whatever the point may be. And lastly, if you're benchmarking externally, please make sure that whoever gives you the data uses an appropriate data set. Don't try and cobble together something with benchmarks that don't really suit you, but you're using them because you don't have anything else. Rather try and look for something alternative there. So this has been our journey this week. I want to, again, before I take questions, just really extend a big thank you to Craig for being a very good master of ceremonies and DJ as well. And for assisting in this, my colleagues Bryden and Mike Phillips and Chris and Bongani, who have helped with the 3 parts that we've covered. And I know that it's been a long journey we've been on this week, and we've covered a lot of territory and a lot of information. But I hope that by looking at the past and the present and now how one can work a little bit better in the future, that it's been practical and useful and interesting for you as well. And I'll now open the floor for any questions that you might have.
Yeah, Sean, if I had to ask a question, So obviously what companies would do is they would target upper quartile or the lower quartile, depending on what was good or bad. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And my question would be, if everyone does that not fly in the face of the morality issue? Because it'll be around efficiency. So I'm just connecting it to, you know, the ratcheting we've seen in executive pay, where executive pay always targets or tries to target the 75th percentile, and we have seen the, let's call it, the negative consequences of that. And if companies all took this approach and tried to become structured totally efficiently and become more and more efficient, would that not mean lower employment, mechanization, and those sort of things?
Chris, yes and no. I think we're going to move to smaller teams, and what I've seen over time is that, you know, one of the impacts of what I referred to right at the beginning of the session, you know, artificial intelligence, 4IR, etc. I mean, there was a very contentious paper that was produced about 3 years ago, where I think it was the Harvard Business Review, where in the Harvard Business Review, they actually listed probably about 150 jobs that will be replaced by software in 10 years' time, and it caused a lot of controversy at the time. So I think we're on the way to smaller teams anyway. That I think is unavoidable. When looking at something like we've just shown, it shouldn't be construed exactly as your 25th, 50th, 75th as you would with remuneration. What it's trying to show is that there are ranges that you can work in. And, you know, your company's circumstances might denote that you're working comfortably in a range that's higher than industry, and it doesn't mean that you should change that. But if you were thinking about extending that size, it might now become debilitating and work against you. So it would leave you, I think, with the moral choice of saying, no, we can stay with the sizes we have. We don't have to go smaller. Or by the same token, we shouldn't go bigger, because then we're going to become ineffective. I don't know if that's fairly much an answer. It's not a hard and fast, as I said, you know. OD, organizational design, and these kind of structural benchmarks are not as exact a science as remuneration. But having the benchmarks is meant to place you in a better area in which to make more informed decisions, but not be considered absolute. There are a lot of variables you have to take into account once you've seen the data.
Correct. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Right, we are right on time.
Just see, Nanette just does have a question in the chat box, Sean.
Just to answer that, Nanette, no, the analytics offering is separate from the Reward Online offering, and I just want to take 40 seconds to explain to you why. It's very dangerous in a way to just replicate industry information. You know, each of the 4 case studies I've dealt with this morning, the client has come with a specific case, a specific situation, which there have been a number of variables around. And how you look at industry is not as simple as just saying we're benchmarking in one way. We're looking at the client variables in their situation, and then we're taking those variables into account when we put together a benchmark sample that they can compare against. So what it means is that analytics benchmarks are not as are not as automated and as standard as remuneration benchmarks. They do rely on certain variables and certain client information and client needs, in which case the test is done to match those needs. So I hope that answers your question, in that the analytics is separate, because it just takes a little more information to extract. And again, once you've extracted, you also need to assist the client with understanding the figures that they are seeing with some high-level industry analysis. Pleasure.
Perfect. I'm going to steal the last few seconds because, Sean, you've had a very good go at thanking everyone else. Even for my rubbish DJ skills. But I think it's...
we'll benchmark you against DJs in industry, okay?
I'm not good at maths, but I can tell you where I'd end up. Just to thank you, Sean, for this, for the new content, for driving this as you've joined 21st Century, and we are super excited about this because we really feel that for 21st Century and for the industry, it's going to be a real game changer. So thanks to you as well, and to all of our delegates. Thank you so much. I wish you a peaceful weekend filled with stuff that makes you happy. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers, cheers.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Bo. I'm glad that you have recovered.
I am feeling a little bit better.
Hi, Morris. Sorry.
I was on a nebulizer
Mr. Banks.
for 3 different cycles in the early hours of this morning. So
well, Bo, I tell you, I don't suffer generally from hay fever or change of seasons, but I think the rains are coming so late this year that I can see it with my boys as well. Sniffles and sneezes and stuff, and we don't normally, so yeah.
Yeah, this is my Achilles heel.
No, but thanks. It was, I think, short enough to...
Yeah, but I think I'm liking how the output of that survey, dovetails so well with the morality and reality discussions that we've been having.
No, what's nice is we've got such good material for further workshops, single workshops, white papers, conference addresses, that kind of thing. We've really got some good material now which we can repackage and reuse. That you don't have to sit again for hours and hours and hours putting all of it together. We've got some really good stuff to work with, which we can use again. So thanks,
do it
guys.
Actively. What I was making notes as we were going through, and I think we need to, given that this coincided with a move to level 1, we need to relaunch, but not call it a launch. And just get out there, get FaceTime with people, with audiences, look for conference opportunities.
But I like that.
Yeah, because
for sure.
new. It is brand new. Having spoken at conferences for the past 15 bloody years, you guys know the same themes just come through constantly. It's and when the new topics come in, and we've seen it from when we advertise, they fill up when it's new and fresh. So yeah.
I was even looking at I think the 3 chapters the 3 of us have been analyzing attendance and whether the strategy worked or didn't work for us. So in today's session, we had at some stage about 21 people.
Yep.
And then it dropped to about 19 throughout the session.
Internal people left,
and then of the 19, just about 60% were 21st century people.
Yeah, we had one client who had to leave. She sent me a private message. Otherwise, the others that were leaving were Zoni to do another meeting and someone else I can't remember.
Sure. So the likelihood shown here is the afternoon session
a lot of our people may not come on board. So that's also timing. Friday that afternoon,
Yeah.
We might just be looking at extremely low numbers.
Mm.
I actually wanted to ask you, what do you think we do in that instance? I mean, do we?
I was about to. That's why I'm putting it out here first.
I fully intend to make a joke out of it. So you can tell me if I'm wrong. I'm gonna use the Friday afternoon. I think people are used to that kind of thing happening, but then we need to carry on. If there are two people, then address them by name. Talk to them and include them. I don't know.
No, what I'll do is, I think what the approach I'm going to take, and tell me if I'm out here, is I'm going to say to them, look, we've very few people on board. I'll take you through the 4 case studies, which I think is what you need to see. But in effect, we're almost talking about 30 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, true. Unless we get a great opportunity for engagement, because the audience
yeah,
that will make it a bit more powerful.
I think it's unfair to them if they have come on and we cancel, but I think I'll just move.
Yeah.
It will almost be not as a webinar speak, but as a personal.
As a conversation.
Make it.
Yeah.
I'll be more bereft in my use of words.
Yeah. So
I was looking at one stage, I was going, "Oh, I'm gonna finish too quickly," and then I thought, "Oh no, I'm going on too long now. I better cut back." So
it was perfect. I think let's just gauge it. This content is perfectly long enough to be able to chop or make longer. Just when you're dealing with case studies, a lot of it is talking. So I think let's just gauge it.
No, it's just play it by ear and see what we get.
It's the last one. We'll make light of it if there's only a few people, and we can say some people joined the morning session because it's a Friday afternoon.
Yeah,
something like that.
But I'll tell you one thing: I have got a bottle of wine that is popping once we finish this afternoon, and I'm going to have my bottle of wine, probably only 2 glasses. And then very soon afterwards, I'm going to collapse because I'm running on fumes right now.
Yes, I bet.
It's been roller coaster for you. We've had the last 2 weeks have been incredibly rough, but
it's the weekend.
Why do I look darker than?
And I hate to say this, but it worked out fine because this is my weekend without the boys, so I can just
relax. No.
Good.
That's it.
Good.
All right, thanks, guys.
Right,
Craig,
guys.
I'll reply to Annabelle
Cool.
and send it just through to you for your comment, and then we can send it off to her. Okay.
Cool. Perfect.
Great.
Cool,
100%.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Hope you
Cheers.
feel okay today.
See you later.
Yes.
Okay. Ciao. Bye.